We are on another My Amazon Guy podcast with one of our clients, Whiskey Grail.
Hi, I'm Adam Sang.
And I'm Jim Walker.
We discovered the Whiskey Grail.
We've redefined the whiskey drinking experience.
Cheers and hail to the Grail.
We have Adam and Jim here today. Jim, thank you for coming on. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having us.
Doing good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right, gents. Tell me a little bit about the brand. What was the start that you guys got? What really kind of brought about and made you guys want to build out the products?
Yeah, so the Whiskey Grail originally was actually an anniversary present. So back in around 2018, I was in college at that point in time, and I was doing woodworking commissions. I've been a woodworker and a blacksmith and craftsperson for all my life, basically. And so in 2018, I was in college. I was trying to kind of help pay my way through school. And so I got commissioned to do a 50th wedding anniversary for one of my good friend's grandparents, basically.
Interesting.
And so Poppy was a big whiskey man. For him, I made a box set, right? So a white oak dovetailed box with black walnut top, hand-forged hardware, the works. And the whole idea was that it was going to be kind of this showpiece, right? The centerpiece you put up on the mantle, you bring down for special occasions type of thing, housing a decanter and then 4 glasses. So when it came time to actually make the box, I made everything, and I couldn't quite find the glasses that I felt were correct or fit. So I had a lot of white oak left over from making the box, so I decided I would try making cups. And so those were the original, they weren't even called Whiskey Grail at the time. That was before the company. But those were kind of the original starting point. And so I thought they were kind of cool. So I made maybe 2 dozen or 3 dozen of these things. And then I just sold them on Facebook. I put it up on Facebook and said, hey, I've got these that I made. Should I even say the price? I don't know. I feel embarrassed about it. I was like $15, because I
inflation.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't see it really as a serious product at the time. The way I saw it was, this is a good way to take scrap material that's too small to do quote unquote real projects with, and recoup that money, right? And recoup that and be able to buy larger pieces of wood. And so that's really how I saw the product originally. But I kept a few around. I had 4 or 5 that I kept myself. And then I had a few that just didn't pass my quality check that I had bolts and stuff in. So then fast forward to 2020, I'm working out of a makerspace that we're actually currently in right now. I'm working out of the makerspace. Adam comes in as a client because we had met during COVID. We had met at a big cafe, which is kind of like a telemarketing. What was it like?
It was they did it as a live kind of broadcasted event where they would talk to entrepreneurs, business people, and they spoke to me at the restaurant, and then they spoke to you, and then I think Burrowwood at the time. And they were just kind of still doing things in the community, trying to get the word out. And that's kind of initially where me and Jim kind of met each other. And of course, initially kind of after meeting him, after I found out that he was this woodworker and has all these skill set, my first response is all right, well, how do we work on a project together, right? And so the initial one was really kind of refinishing some of the tables, because they had seen some age on them. But we became kind of really close at that time because it was COVID, right? There's not really that much you can do outside. And then
people you can socialize with and
exactly
do anything.
So he became my person during that period of time, right?
Yeah.
And then he taught me all these skills. And I think the thing that Jim doesn't always kind of bring to the surface is that he's just this amazing kind of engineer, craftsman, just so much skill contained within this guy right here. And for me, I was hanging out with him. I come from the business side of things, right? I'm always looking for the angle, looking for different ways that, businesses or opportunities. And, there's this one phrase I would say, what you got, right? Just kind of hanging around the shop. And then I remember it so vividly. He actually took out this bin, and it had all these kind of tiny bits of wood in it. And then he brought out, what was this wooden kind of drinking vessel, and he showed it to me. And he said, "This is for drinking bourbon." And I remember that moment so vividly because I got chills up and down my spine. And I said, "Repeat that just one more time. What do you say this for?" And he's like, it's for drinking bourbon. And from that point on, I basically grabbed everything. I grabbed basically all the grails that were available to us. And I went to like, cause I just had joined this like bourbon drinking community, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what bourbon people do is we get together, we
That
drink
we do.
bourbon, we taste, and it was in the middle of COVID, right? And I took all these grails to these guys and I was like, hey, check this out. Right. Like I put it in front of them and I said, hey, what I want you to do is taste some bourbon in a glass, taste the same bourbon in the Grail, and tell me if you can taste the difference, right? And I remember sitting kind of like around the island, like looking at everybody, and everybody, like after they drank it, they nodded and they were like, hey, man, it's doing something. I don't know what it's doing. It's doing something. And then, to me, I didn't really care if it was doing something better, right? So I think that's kind of like something that some entrepreneurs, they get it twisted. It's like, oh, my product is so much better. That's for the market to decide, right?
Yeah.
The market has to experience it and they have to decide for themselves whether it's better or not. And so I went back to Jim and I think I like nonstop talked to Jim for like the next like day and a half. And I laid out basically from top to bottom, like how everything was going to go. And at that moment in time, I was just giving as much as I could. I was just like, hey, like, you need to get Ron Swanson, right?
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about doing like a collaboration with him. I said
that'd
like,
be cool.
Yeah. It's still on the table.
Yeah.
So
Nick,
hey,
if
man,
I mean, if you guys can make it happen, that'd be pretty awesome.
Your offer, man, I'd love to work with you.
Exactly. We sent it when we went to his wood shop. Oh, yeah.
I think we did.
Yes, we did. But regardless, I think that's kind of like the start of it. And, that was 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And, we've had some amazing wins along the way. We had some crazy, like, stories of like, almost losing the company, right? Like that's just kind of like the natural progression of it. But we're in a very secure space right now. I think even with kind of like everything that's happening, from, the tariffs and all that sort of thing, Jim made this phenomenal decision to want to keep the manufacturing in the States. So all whiskey grails are handmade right here in Statesboro, Georgia.
And most of our supply chain is American as well, right? So all our wood obviously comes from, really, it's mostly East Coast. A lot of our wood comes from like New York, Virginia kind of area where white oak is very plentiful. Like all our wax and stuff is coming from American apiaries. It's coming from American apiaries. So as much as we can, one of our goals in this is one of our values really is employing people here at home and creating opportunities here.
Well, and that's clearly worked out well for you given the current environment we're in the world, right? And
That's true. Yeah.
That does actually pose a question I'm curious about, because you did say you almost lost the company at some point.
Sure.
What happened there? I assume there's a big mistake somewhere that happened. What was that kind of area?
When you're starting kind of like a company,
it's just very fragile. Right.
Your lifeline is your sales.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we were starting out, we had a much smaller team. There would be times when there would be just these, what we call droughts, right? Like, either the marketing isn't working the way it's supposed to, the information isn't getting out to the public. There's not enough in the wild. Right now, at this point, in my opinion, what's happening is people are showing the Grail to their buddies and they're like, oh, dude, like I got to get one myself. Right. But you have to hit critical mass before that can happen. And so it's this constant kind of like cycle of doing that.
I'll also say like one of the challenges early on was that we were pretty much doing almost 100% of our sales and marketing through social media, which is potentially very good, right? Because we would have, so I don't know how much we want to talk about other platforms on here, but basically like we'd have these huge sales spikes, right? I remember like one time we had like 700 units in inventory and then gone, right? Yeah. Like it was to the point where it was actually when we were moving, right? So we were about to move shop because the shop we were operating out of was being renovated. And so we were kind of in this conversation of like, well, what do we do here? Because we've got like 700 units in inventory. We don't really have a lot of cash on hand. And we're about to have to start paying rent, a much higher rent than we're paying. And so the question was really like, how do we navigate this? Because if the company's going to grow, we obviously need a space. But if it's not going to make sales, then
What's the point?
What's the point, right? And then literally like that week, our social media marketing hit, and we had a video blow up, and in 2 weeks all those were gone, right? All those units were gone in 2 weeks, and we were behind, right? Right.
So good problem to have at the end of the day, realistically.
Yeah. Very good problem to have. But then you'd have like the backside of that curve, right? So then what we would do is we'd like build up like our team to be able to meet this demand, and then the demand would go away, right? Because that piece of content got old, or the algorithm changed, or whatever. And then now suddenly you have this relatively large team and not enough sales to support it. So now you're building inventory again, but your cash reserves are also, very depleting very quickly. So that's like where we ran into like problems, I guess, was because just the sales volatility combined with like the relative fragility of a small business that's really pretty new. Hopefully we're past that, right?
As of recent, we had a little bit of a drought in Q1.
Yeah.
But my Amazon team really prepared us well for Prime Day. And I don't know if Prime Day, and this is impossible, but I don't know if Prime Day kind of like communicated with every other kind of like sales channel that we had and said, hey, we're going to pick Prime Day, and then everybody start buying. But that's literally what happened, right? It's like, oh, wow, like, on Amazon now, kind of like TikTok was kind of like, just moving through product, and then the website's going off, right? And I think kind of like diversifying that, I think is really smart, instead of like relying everything into a single silo, because there's going to be those times when kind of like the sales like start.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons like within the last couple of months, right, we've started working on people's direct consumer side, right, and doing, the off Amazon stuff for people, because you're exactly right. Diversification is at this point in time kind of necessary, especially with Amazon owning so much of the market already as is, and being such controllers within the space, that it just makes sense to have more options, right? They're still at the end of the day only 40-ish% of the total market as far as sales go, right? So if you're looking at that, it's like, okay, whereas the other 60%, it's outside Amazon. So you have to go and find that from that perspective. So absolutely in agreement, the diversification is always a good idea.
So I don't know if you use outside vendors at all, but if there's any opportunity that, that me as an agency can come alongside and help out, we would love the opportunity to do so.
Well, fantastic.
Always looking for the angle.
Classic.
Always looking for the angle.
Classic.
No, it's funny. So essentially, I have to imagine you guys are both big whiskey guys then.
I've definitely grown a lot. So this is actually kind of the funny thing, right? Is
you're about to tell me that you own a company called the Whiskey Grail, and you weren't a whiskey guy?
Well, because the thing was, right, like to me, it began really as a commission. Right? I've never been like a big drinker in general. I never disliked whiskey, right? But I still don't drink a ton. I had the same, 3 or 4. Well, I've been adding to my whiskey collection, but I'll work on a bottle for, a year pretty easily. Whereas, some guys are going through a bottle a month or even faster, right? And I've been enjoying kind of experiencing more of what's out there. And I definitely feel like this company has refined my palate in terms of like, at this point, like if I taste a whiskey, I can kind of tell you a little bit about the tasting notes and say, oh, well, this is better because whatever, right? I know a little bit more of the lore around the different bourbons.
We're frauds.
But I wouldn't consider myself a connoisseur. Yeah.
For me, I don't drink. Like I don't drink that often. I will enjoy every now and then, but it's not something that I partake in like much. Right. I'm mainly kind of like working for the lack of a better way to put it. But I will say this: I have absolutely fallen in love with the whiskey community.
Yeah.
I think it's so rare. I deal with a lot of different kind of like communities in my line of work. And I think it's so rare to have a community that is so willing to give. And, there's a concept, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's called a handshake of a bottle or a whiskey that in certain areas that I'm not able to get, you're actually basically gifting kind of like it's legal to ship through kind of like the postal system, but they basically gift each other these handshakes so that people can kind of like get things that they can't get. And there's no other community out there. I really mean this. There's no other community that I'm aware of that does this type of, hey, like if you can't get it, I'm gonna hook you up. And that's such a like powerful, and that's why like for me, like I'm always trying to find ways to give back in terms of either people that have are looking for grails or whatever it is. I'm always open to try to figure out a way for them to get the product.
I think that's a very interesting thing that a lot of people very frequently don't typically think of, is the fact that you don't necessarily have to be extremely integrated or like the primary customer utilizing the product to know when something is a good product and how to really sell that product, right? As long as the market sees it, because you said at the beginning, right? The market is who truly gets to decide a good versus a bad product at the end of the day. And so I always like hearing that, whether or not somebody is, because I think there's always two different ways people come up with products and brands and things like that. First one being is that they are the primary consumer and they are solving a problem for themselves, right? That then they're like, hey, other people probably want this. And then the secondary being you're creating something for others, right? That you find people around you may like and may enjoy, similar in the sense of your story there, of essentially how you had to create that for Poppy, was it?
Yeah. Poppy.
There we go. And you knew that he was going to enjoy it. And next thing you know, you're taking the scraps and whatnot to a group that's going to enjoy it. And what do you know? It's a great product. And I think that's always so interesting to see from any type of brand's perspective, is whether or not the people who are truly doing it are doing it because they needed it or because they saw that other people did.
Would it help like if we were connoisseurs? Absolutely. Like that's the reality of it, is that having that knowledge, because you speak the lingo, right? Like you're able to kind of like communicate that. Especially in the early days, we struggled a lot because we were like, how do we talk about this, right? Like we don't know how to kind of like make this and position it. But again, I'm telling you that bourbon community, there's nothing more that a bourbon lover wants to talk about than bourbon. And so if you come to them with like kind of like open ears and open eyes, they're going to tell you, hey, what's the best one? What's the one that's the best value? How do you get like, the bourbon picks, right? Like how can you get the best bourbon? Because they're just passionate about it. And so because of that, again, not all industries, we just lucked out to be able to pick the one that really is able to kind of like communicate with us in that manner.
And it helps too, because like I feel like there's a fair amount of overlap between like woodworkers and bourbon lovers. I feel like a lot of the bourbon community is also into this kind of, they're manly men who want to do that type of stuff. So there was a little bit of an easier time, I feel like, with being able to kind of forge those relationships because there are shared interests, and I think they had some interest in the product as well, which helped too.
No, always help. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of growth curve. So it sounds like you guys have essentially hit bunch of droughts, so to speak, but are we in more of a stable environment at this point in time, would you say? What's growth look like? What's on the next horizon, I suppose?
I sure hope so, that we are in some stability. All right. I think, we've seen growth year over year. We started out just making maybe a couple hundred of grails sold.
I mean, it's like at the beginning we were doing good if we were making 50 units a week. I think at the very beginning we were doing 30 to 50 units a week for probably most of that first year, to be honest with you.
And is that 30 to 50? That's for all of your platforms, not just.
Well, that's production. I guess at that point in time, it would have been solely being sold on our website.
Yes.
Okay. And like at that point we were doing like farmers markets and stuff, like local type stuff. But that was kind of like the very beginning. We had like 3 part-time people working, and then me and Adam was handling like all the marketing and stuff. So that was like very, very early days. And then, now we've got a team of like 27 people. Not all of those are full-time. A lot of those are part-time. We have a lot of college students that work with us, but still, like, the team is fairly substantial at this point. So that's been really exciting. There's also been like, obviously, it was kind of nice back when we were doing like, we had 2 part-time people, because it's like, okay, well, if we don't, I can cover the paychecks, if I have to, kind of a thing, and now we're at this point, I'm like, I cannot cover like payroll.
It's that, thing about growing is you always kind of want to grow any type of company, any type of brand, right? But there comes this point where you're like, when there's not much risk when you're first starting out, right? It's you, usually maybe 1-2 other people type thing. And it's like, if this doesn't work out, nobody's going to be really all that much worse off in life. Whereas, you get to a certain point, it's like, there's a bunch of responsibility there. You got to
That's
keep this
right.
running. You got to
Failure's
keep,
not an option.
improving and whatnot. So that's where I'm kind of, curious. So outside of, obviously the bread and butter, the whiskey rail, has there been thoughts towards like the future, right? Like what other types of innovations might come out from, a product side or anything like that for you guys?
Yeah, there's definitely some projects that we're looking at for the future, and one of the things that's been interesting, and at least from my perspective, has been kind of like the product development side of things, and I think like it's been very challenging for us to develop new products, I guess is ultimately what I'm saying. But I think part of that is we were kind of the product development for the Whiskey Grail was really done before the company existed. And I did it over the course of several years, really, because kind of the initial conception and then the different iterations that I did before we even began producing it on scale, right? Really gave me a really great handle for the product. And also, like, again, several different iterations really before it went to mass market that were really beneficial to like kind of having a very refined product right out of the gate. If you go and look at a Whiskey Grail from our first batch of 100 or so, and then you look at one of our most recent Whiskey Grails, they're basically the same. There's a few little tweaks and stuff that have changed, but you really wouldn't be able to tell the difference unless you're pretty familiar with the product. And I think that's a testament to kind of the work that went in beforehand. And so now, as we're kind of juggling, okay, we've got to keep up our production. We're also trying to optimize stuff, all the time. We're trying to reduce waste. We're trying to stretch our labor further and further to make sure that we're being effective, make sure that we don't have problems in production, making sure our quality standards are held up. So that all takes like a lot of time to maintain. And so I'm finding that actually making new products is challenging.
But what's the new product? He asked what the new product was.
Well, so I go into this, right? So we've got there's I think about 3 new products that we want to launch we've been working on for some time now. One is smokers. So we want to do a smoker top. I think it plays in really perfectly with the Whiskey Grail because you already kind of have this smoky, oaky flavor and the influence that imparts. The next logical step is to be able to light your drink on fire. So we've got these smoker tops that we've been working on. We're really close on those, kind of just trying to figure out the last little details of making sure that we can provide this at a reasonable price while maintaining our quality standards and also making sure that our people are getting paid what they're worth, right? So it's kind of a combination and a juggling of all these different values. The next product that I'm really excited to be working on this year is whiskey boxes. So I mentioned earlier, that's kind of how this whole thing started is we had this box set where we have, a decanter and then 4 what would become Whiskey Grails. And I really want to get back to that. It gives the whole thing so much more presence. I want something that's kind of heirloom quality, have like that centerpiece on the mantle over the fire kind of a thing, and really have something special because I think there's a desire for that. And then also, we can size them to different whiskey bottles because we can't sell the whiskey itself. We don't have that alcohol license. Be able to make the box and say, hey, this will fit a bottle of Maker's Mark, or this will fit a bottle of Eagle Rare, because those are 2 very differently sized bottles. And so kind of have a few different options, but really be able to kind of provide that experience of like taking something down off the mantle and bringing out the bottle and bringing out the grails and really having this like very elevated experience, right? The tradition around kind of the drinking. And that's one of the things that like I think to me is so important because like that's kind of what Poppy was all about, right? I think, not only was he somebody who really enjoyed whiskey, but he also enjoyed the traditions around it that really pull people in together. He was a family man. He was extremely dedicated to family. That was everything to him. And so to kind of have a product that was a part of that was very powerful to me, but also I think that there's a lot of people out there looking for anything to help strengthen those connections and strengthen those traditions. So that's one of the things I'm really excited to be working on this year. And then the third thing, we want to start doing these ice cube molds, right? So we want to do these like ice cube balls that are like the big ice cubes, that have like WG on them and then they fit and they're perfectly sized to go into a Whiskey Grail because The Whiskey Grail is a little bit smaller internally than a standard.
You can't put them in there. I've tried.
Yeah. So we want to kind of have that so that we've got all those products ready for people to have everything. So those are kind of the three main products we were working on right now, hoping to launch soon.
Fourth idea for you, if you haven't already thought of it, mini casks. As a guy that likes it, like I said, mini casks would probably do really well in the community.
Another one that we've been suggested, and I think is a good idea, is like kind of beer stein sized ones, right? So doing beer steins would be cool too.
That actually would be really cool. It would also probably expand your versatility in your audience quite a bit because you kind of move further into that and whatnot into kind of a tasting realm. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that one. I like that. I like hearing and you talk about as well the research side of this and like the development side, especially as like guys who, are self-proclaimed not really like whiskey drinkers, right? But trying to come up with the ideas around like what are people really going to want within this, right? And a lot of that I think comes down to talking to the community, right? And like figuring out your customer base. And I think that's the issue that a lot of brands have is truly trying to understand like what is the product that I should be, iterating on and doing next. And so hearing you also say something like a Stein where it's like, okay, you don't have to stay within a very, very specific customer segmentation, right? Like you can kind of expand yourself. You can kind of do different things because you aren't just like so dead set on one exact idea. And I always like that because there are definitely a lot of brands that kind of sit themselves into a situation where they're like, I only do this and will only work for this. I think that's always a shoot themselves in the foot kind of mentality.
And that's something that we definitely have been like very aware of, that we're kind of like we're kind of like a one-trick pony right now, where it's like we really just have the Whiskey Grail, and we also have like our shot grails too, which are great.
Yeah.
But really our big product is the Whiskey Grail, and I imagine that will continue to be our flagship product, right? I think that makes sense. But being able to, again, kind of have some more offerings, I think would be really beneficial, because that also opens up kind of our pre-existing customer base, right? So people who already have a couple of Whiskey Grails, they're not necessarily going to buy another one for themselves because I already have 4. Like I don't need more, right? But they might say, oh, they've come out with a beer stein. Like that's awesome. Let's get one of those. Oh, they've come out with this box set. Let's get one of those, because then now we can put our existing grails in it and can kind of elevate it more. It opens up kind of our whole, we have like so much data on our customers, right? Like we have emails and phone numbers and stuff, and being able to market to them because they already like us, they already are customers.
Yeah, it really brings the lifetime value of the average customer up quite a bit when you kind of can expand into those different areas and different offerings, so to speak, with different types of products, and essentially just iterate on that over time to continue the growth cycle, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, hey, if you guys ever need a product tester, I got you.
Hey, all right.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you for coming on. Anything you want the people to know before we hop off here?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of my Amazon guy and kind of like the things that you guys have done,
Always happy to hear that.
Yeah. So, if you do start to see some sort of success selling in e-com, very quickly there's going to be people that try to knock your product. And we experienced this actually relatively recently, which is why it's kind of like fresh on my mind. So I started seeing it probably about a month or 2 months ago, where they are taking my content, they're taking pictures that we've taken, they're taking videos that we've done, and they're basically putting it onto various different social media platforms. There were listings on Amazon. That is why it's so important to work with a partner like my Amazon guy. Because what they did was I literally just forwarded them the listing and I said, hey, check this out. And they took care of the rest, right? And, having a team in which like they are so well versed, because I could probably, like, to be honest with you, I could probably spend the time to figure it out. But as a business owner and as a smaller company, you have limited time. Yeah. I have multiple different kind of like, organizations and companies that I'm working on. Jim has other kind of like responsibilities that he has. And it's just like, where do you find the time? So relying on my Amazon guy to take care of at least the Amazon stuff, right? And I would get reports. And that's another thing that I very much admire about what the system that my Amazon guy does is they will provide on a weekly basis, basically top to bottom, exactly the information that I'm looking for. You know, sometimes I will ask a question, an email question. It's like, oh, it's in the report. I'm like, oh, my bad. You know what? The report that's been sent to you already, right? Again, as a co-founder in the company, it is so valuable to have those metrics at your fingertips. And that's what you guys kind of like operate on. And so, you know, time and time again, I think I've been very impressed and glad that, you know, I have you guys kind of like in my arsenal, right? That, you know, at any point when I have an Amazon question, I don't have to go look on Google. I don't have to go look on the forums. I don't have to go look on Reddit to try to figure something out. I literally send an email and I know I'm going to be taken care of.
I love it. I think you make an excellent point that, you know, at the end of the day, time is probably the most valuable asset for people, especially for business owners at the end of the day. And that's what we always like to think of, that we give the most of back for people. It's just a time save, if nothing else.
So shout out to Anya, Art, Pablo. You guys, like those guys are kind of like, you know, the backbone of the Amazon side of the company.
We love it. We love it. I got the chance to meet Anya and Pablo in person back in March, and that was both of them are fantastic people. So absolutely love that.
It really speaks volumes to your company. So Skunk Skin, Matt, he's kind of like one of your guys' clients too. He had a premiere on the Amazon show. We live in kind of like a small town, 45 minutes away from Savannah. Athens about 3 hours away. So I drove up and was walking around and I see a guy with a my Amazon guy shirt on, and I'm like, dude, that's crazy, right? Like the amount of support that's coming from your guys' side to the client is huge, right? Oftentimes when you're working with big agencies, you're not going to get that feel, right? He didn't have to go out, he didn't have to do that, but the fact that he made that like to come out to the premiere speaks volumes for what you guys do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of, you guys have your My Amazon Guy shirts? Get the new ones?
I sometimes get mine, but Jim needs one. If you don't mind sending another one.
I'll get you guys a link. I'll make sure to get you your own
shirts. I usually want one that takes the shirts.
Yeah.
Oh, so thanks for selling me out.
I got you.
I live in my cave, you know. I don't leave the shop much.
Don't worry, I got you. I'll get you something. Make sure Adam doesn't steal it or anything.
Nice.
I'll get you my address. I'll get you my address after that.
There you go. All right, gentlemen. Well, hey, thanks so much for hopping on. I love this conversation. Like I said, I love the product and whatnot as well, as an avid fan myself. So looking forward to the new products and whatnot once those are out. From there, happy to have you guys on again sometime if you ever just want to chill and chat. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, gents.
Peace out.
Have a good one.
Latest.